also with us. Ami, are you there? Yeah, you're there. Hi, you're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yeah, hello, Ami.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. How are things in Gujarat?
They're fine. It's the new normal. We're just trying to get used to everything and move forward.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
We are recording the event. Yes. Ami, before we move forward, I think let's wait because some participants would be joining us. Can we wait 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
And Neelam, वो video चला पाओगी तुम? Will you be able to play it, Neelam? Neelam? Yeah, Neelam, are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, will you be able to play the video?
Sure, ma'am, sure.
Ami, I just got hold of a video which UN Women have made, and it's in the voice of Kate Winslet, and
Okay.
it's about violence against women or domestic violence that has increased during COVID-19 pandemic. So
Absolutely.
can you just play that video?
Sure, of course. Of course.
Yeah. There is no voice. There is no sound, Neelam.
But ma'am, I'm unmute. Just wait.
Okay.
Ma'am. Ma'am, is it audible now?
No, it's not audible yet. Let me see if I can play it because I forwarded it to you, right?
Ma'am, are you able to listen now?
No, it's not. Is it audible to anyone? Ami, are you able to hear it?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, let me just try if I can play it. Neelam, who is the host here? Is Gaurav the host?
Yes,
हाँ
ma'am.
गौरव, हाँ गौरव.
Yes, ma'am.
तो गौरव मैं आपको भेज दूं?
मैम मैंने नीलम मैम को वैसे बता दिया है, वो कर रहे हैं चालू, नहीं तो मुझे भेज दीजिए आप, कोई इश्यू नहीं है.
अच्छा. It's not audible yet. Neelam, let me try. Let me share my screen.
Okay, ma'am.
Screen share कर.
Gaurav, I think you can try it. तुम try कर लो Gaurav. That would be better.
ओके मैम.
Ma'am, right now?
मैम सेंड कर दीजिए मुझे
Yes,
नीलम मैम.
it's audible now.
Okay, ma'am.
Right now, many people are trapped
या इट्स ऑडिबल.
in their homes with an abuser. This is the shadow pandemic. In one weekend, calls to domestic abuse helplines in the UK went up by 65%. In the US, Asia, and pretty much everywhere, reported numbers are rising. These aren't just numbers, they're people you might know. If you think someone is in trouble, check in on them. Ask them if they're okay and if everything at home is okay. Educate yourself about domestic violence. Know the details of local services like helpline numbers or shelters. If she tells you or you suspect that her life or the lives of her children are in immediate danger, call the protection units or the police. The shadow pandemic is spreading right now. Let's help each other safely right now.
Ma'am, you are muted.
Yes, I don't know if that was audible to everyone or not, but we can begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome all of you to this national webinar organized by WDC and IQAC Shamlal College. I would request everyone to please mute themselves. This webinar is on challenges for women during COVID-19 pandemic, and we have among us Miss Ami Patel. She is a psychotherapist. She has joined us as resource person for this webinar. Thank you, Ami, for joining us. And yes, and this webinar specifically holds much importance in present times, and we from our college have been organizing a lot of online events since the pandemic began or since the lockdown began in India in March, and this particular webinar is one in that series. This webinar basically, it's going to look at the things that have come to a how things have come to a halt, how there is lot of introspection required, there is lot of discussion required around issues that that plague our society. Specifically, the pandemic has made us realize that this is not just an health issue. It has brought with it several other socio-economic and socio-cultural issues. It has brought all these issues to the surface. We organized a major conference in January where we talked about role of women, or we talked about women in 21st century. That conference was hugely successful, and that actually also made us ponder over and open discussion around areas that affect women even in 21st century. So there is glass ceiling that exists. There are there are concerns, there are bourgeois concerns that women face, or urban women face in their everyday life. They may not talk about it, they may not want to talk about it, they may not know that they are actually going through a lot of lot of issues and oppression. So these are the issues that have actually been highlighted in a major way since the pandemic has begun, and all the women who are even present today in this webinar must have seen that, must have realized that the pandemic has actually made them ponder over their achievements as individual and as belonging to this gender, and how far those achievements are really, they hold when we are faced with such situations of crisis. So for that we have to discuss these issues, to discuss problem areas that that women in today's time and specifically during the pandemic have been facing. We have Ami Patel with us. She's a psychotherapist and a clinical consultant with more than 18 years of experience in individual counseling, family work, parent education, professional training, program management, staff and student supervision. She has completed her master's in clinical social work from State University of New York, and bachelor's in psychology from California State University. She has also been an associate professor at Columbia University, New York. She's currently in private practice in Vadodara. Her areas of specialty are mental health, trauma, and gender violence. Thank you, Ami, for joining us for this webinar today. It would be really great to hear you talk about these issues. And we discussed about a lot of things 2 days back, and it was really nice, connecting with you that day. I would request our principal, sir, before we begin the event, to give the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kusha, the convener of Women Development Center of Shamlal College, and also the convener of IQAC. Actually, I congratulate you and your entire team for having thought about this seminar, and particularly inviting a resource person who is also a practitioner, who can also throw light, and not only throw light, who can actually interact and guide the different or various aspects of the facets of challenges you have been talking about, which has this pandemic has brought before us. Having said that, as you played that video also, I was very intently watching. This issue has been severe implications for a country like India, where already the society is yet to come up with the West, and the society is not only evolving, it is in a very, very transitional stage. So and when people are forced to stay for such a long duration, and secondly also what is scaring me is that this pandemic is not going. Whenever we are thinking of going another step, the second wave is coming. When we pass that second wave, that now the third wave started. So that is little bit scary, and this also increase the different types of challenges. We just before the start of the pandemic, we had that international conference where we talked about the challenges of women in 21st century, when already there are 2 decades has already been gone. And there also we have been discussing about various challenges and how this transitional phenomenon has upscale the active participation of women in different spheres and the different types of challenges they are facing in the working life. So certainly this pandemic came, and this has completely given us a different dimension and different domain of challenges. So these are the very, very, not only very, very challenging for the women, for the men and the administration also. So complex, different kind of a complex wave of challenges, I can say. So I would also be very, very glad and happy that you have chosen such a intellectual and who has vast, practical experience also, and she has a vast repertoire of things, having traveled all around the world, and she had been, she had seen the West and what have been happening in India. so we can come up something which really help us in fine tuning our skills and something we can give back to the society. So with this words, once again, I welcome you, uh,
Thank you very much.
Professor Ami Portal, to this family of SLC, and we would like to have you with us in person also when the pandemic goes. So with
Yes.
these thoughts, once again, welcome you and congratulations to the team, Women Development Center of our college. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Ami, without much ado, I think we would love to hear you now. So please, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kusha, for having me. And thank you to the entire SLC team, WDC and IQAC for having me to come and speak about this very important topic. I think like Principal Sir said, we thought that this would be maybe a short-term thing. This would be a bit of a hiccup in our year. We would figure it out and then we would move on. And unfortunately, what we're seeing, I think, is that instead of it being a short-term problem, it's become more of a long-term challenge. And so I think what's happening is we're really having to reevaluate a lot of how we were seeing ourselves, our situations, our circumstances, and also how to continue our responsibilities and our lives really on a long-term scale under the pretext of this global pandemic. Now, obviously, none of us have been through such a global pandemic before, so we're all figuring it out. We're all learning as we go. And I think what happens is we learn certain things and they help, and then other things that don't help. So we have to sort of reconvene, reconfigure, and move ahead accordingly. So what I'll start by doing is, I think, talking about some sort of background in terms of the women's movement, etc. Because I think if we're going to talk about challenges that women are facing during the pandemic, well, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So we really have to talk about the big picture before we sort of narrow in on the current situation, right? So Kush and I spoke briefly as we were discussing this webinar. And I think, what we realize is that obviously the women's movement has achieved a lot in the last 70, 80 years. It's led to big strides in terms of representation in the public sphere, especially on social and professional levels. However, there are still a lot of issues that are remaining, and that's primarily, I think, because of the patriarchal constructs that exist and really make up this society that we're in. I'm going to speak specifically to India because this is where we are and this is what we're referring to. However, a lot of these things obviously are echoed throughout the world and on a global scale, but I think this is very specific to our country and our culture. Additionally, I think that the socialization of women in childhood and childhood onwards also really contributes to the challenges that are faced later in life, right? If we really think back to when we're younger, I think socialization really encourages girls to either through explicit messages that are spoken or through modeled behavior through the women around them, to really focus on the needs of others, to prioritize the needs of others, to feel either somehow guilty or ashamed for focusing on themselves or thinking about their own needs, and also expects them to somehow sacrifice themselves either emotionally or psychologically for the greater good, i.e. society, family, etc. And then I think simultaneously what happens is that they're also expected to sort of fit within the ideal images of sort of the daughter/daughter-in-law image. And I think women are also measured by the milestones of marriage and motherhood, right? So what happens is when they're measured by the milestones of marriage and motherhood, then they're also bestowed with value and status accordingly. So what it does is it already really limits the path. Now, when you add to that the onset of a global pandemic in which there are things like loss of employment or work from home situation, elevated financial stress, anxiety and fear around health issues, the loss of formal and in-person schooling for children, and the absence of household help, it creates challenges on a whole other level. Now, I think what happened is that not only did this pandemic bring this nation to a halt, literally, because we were in a lockdown for 6 to 8 weeks, it also created a bit of a stagnancy in terms of in terms of where we were and what we were doing. And what this did, I think, is probably provide us with an opportunity to really reflect on where we truly are, and how far we've come in terms of women's empowerment, right? As well as the gaps that still exist. And there are indeed gaps that do exist. Now, I just want to refer quickly to the video that you shared, Kusha, about domestic violence, because I think that's not spoken about a lot. But I worked for an organization that worked with survivors of gender violence in New York for almost 12 years. And we know that gender violence, domestic violence, sorry, exists everywhere. It happens in India, it happens in the US, it happens all across the globe. And it's about power and it's about control, right? It's not necessarily about the culture you come from or your background or anything like that. So what happens is we know that domestic violence increases because of access. So because of the lockdown, because of the global pandemic, partners were home, abusive partners were home, either they were out of work, increasing financial stress and emotional stress. There was access to the victim. There was access to time and opportunity and lack of resources because people were not moving about freely. It was difficult to reach out for help. I think there were a lot of challenges that really presented themselves and allowed for domestic violence rates to increase in this time. I just want to clarify though, I'm not saying that financial stress and emotional stress cause domestic violence, because they don't. Domestic violence is a choice that people choose to engage in because they can. It's not because of this stress or that stress. It's simply a power and control dynamic. And obviously when you have a society like ours that is built on patriarchal constructs, there is sometimes a sanctioned implicit sanctioning of domestic violence, or even explicit sanctioning of domestic violence. There is this idea that, the victim blaming perspective begins. Well, what did she do? She must have been nagging. He must be so stressed out. He's overworked. She's frustrated. All these old sort of myths that start playing into this process of understanding domestic violence as well. So I think that also sort of added to the dynamic that we're talking about. Am I properly audible so far, Kusha? Yeah, okay, all right. So now let's talk about what this looks like, right? So obviously, again, in this cultural context, household work is still considered to be under a woman's purview, right? Women who are working outside of the home are generally still expected to manage all the responsibilities within the home and then focus on their work outside. And I think, again, this is upheld by the structure that's the foundation for this society. Unpaid domestic labor, i.e. childcare, elder care, cooking, cleaning, domestic management, home management, it's undervalued. And yet it's overemphasized as the underpinning on which a good Indian woman's honor, public image, and value are constructed. So I think that it really creates a contradictory sort of experience for women, right? It's like, oh, she gets educated, she gets a great job opportunity, she is able to rise in her career, but ultimately at the end of the day, when she comes home, it's still about this little box that she has to sort of fit into. So it doesn't matter sort of how far she may be able to fly and how far she may be able to spread the wings. Ultimately, the nest is where the sort of the crux of the obligation and duty lie. And it does present challenges, right, on many levels for women. So I think that, and I would speculate probably that this applies to many of the women that are present on this webinar, no matter how experienced and accomplished you may all be as professionals, you may indeed face some of the same issues in your own homes, right? Which shows us that even in 2020, there might still be certain challenges, maybe unsaid, but there nonetheless in terms of how responsibilities or priorities are perceived for us. I think that in addition to the physical and mental labor that goes into women either working within the home and or working outside the home, there's an additional sort of emotional and psychological labor, I think, that's performed on a daily basis, right? And I think it's one of the pieces that we may not often think about, but it does play a huge role in contributing to things like frustration, being overwhelmed, even burnout, emotional burnout, right? There's this constant sort of running over, to-do lists that need to be completed. There's always a race to meet timelines, whether it's meal times or school times. There's managing of staff. There's juggling of adult and child moods and tantrums sometimes. And I think that oftentimes this generation is finding themselves to be what we call the sandwich generation, where they're responsible, especially because in our society, the joint family system exists, right? And that's primarily because there's no social security system here. So the joint family system, obviously, I think what came about because of that, right? To make up for that. So this is like social security for the generation above to rely on the next generation to provide financial and emotional support. So what happens is in this sandwich generation, people are taking care of their elders, their parents, sometimes even grandparents, and then also taking care of their children while still managing all the responsibilities that they have. And I think for this sandwich generation, and then what happens is when you add a global pandemic, you have children coming back home, adult children even coming back home from college or from, if they're working in another city, they were often summoned home, which I'll get into in a little bit. So the responsibilities add up. So now these children have their studies or their work responsibilities from home. You've got the elders who need their care. And then you've got this person in the middle where she's juggling her either work from home responsibilities or home responsibilities. And it's just, it gets to be overwhelming, right? It gets to feel like it's too much at times. Excuse me. And I think that when we talk about, we obviously can't talk about this without talking about the specific gender roles as we've been discussing. So they get peddled as micro and macro management, right? As Kusha and I were discussing, right? So sometimes it can be the idea of, well, you take care of these things at home and let me worry about the big stuff, right? As if the home stuff isn't big stuff as it is. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was a very important point to discuss. So how do we feel about all this? I think that it's really important not just to talk about what's happening and how it's happening, but how do we feel? How does it affect us? Because it does. And I think that we as a society are also sort of raised to believe that if you're strong, you can do anything. If you work hard, you can do anything. And that's not always true. That's not true. Because we as human beings, because we're not robots or machines, right? We're human beings. So we as human beings get tired, we get overwhelmed, we feel stressed, we feel anxious, we feel scared, we feel angry, we feel confused, we feel frustrated. We have a whole host of emotions that we can feel at any given time. And when you add the stress of a global pandemic in which you're worried about contracting a virus here, there, everywhere, and you have all these additional responsibilities, it really adds to the emotional toll that a situation like this can take on the best of us. Even someone like me who's trained, I'm a mental health professional, I also found myself feeling incredibly overwhelmed in this situation, right? Because it's an uncharted territory for us. We've never been here before. And so I think we were all finding our feet and figuring out how to sort of deal and what we were experiencing. So I think in some ways, this pandemic has really created feelings of isolation in people. We are a culture that is incredibly communal and social. And so the idea of being in your house for 2 months, only going out for essentials, and that's really only if you need the essentials, created a really big challenge for people, the idea of not being able to meet up with friends, etc. And for others, it created a sense of comfort that they were having these common or shared experiences with each other, even though they couldn't connect, right? And the impact of this all is seen on a social, economic, and personal level. Now, I think family dynamics really were impacted, obviously, during this time and really shifted, right? So many people, just because many people spent more time with their family members than they ever really had before, right? Oftentimes, if someone worked from the home or half of the family worked from the home, you saw them a bit in the morning and then a bit in the evening, and then the day is done. You weren't having that constant interaction that happened during lockdown, right? So what happened is, as a result, many people reported that they saw their family members in a different light. some in a good way and some in not such a good way, right? Some people felt that they had more positive experiences because they got to spend more quality time with their family members, playing or spending time together, watching movies, etc. And others felt that more time together led to increased opportunities for conflict, because it was the first time that there had been that 24-hour recurring cycle of interaction when you're discussing, again, you're juggling and you're maybe spending more time, and things get on your nerves, or people get on your nerves, or the way that people speak, or the way that there were a lot of different things that were happening, and so there were positive things, but there were also these undeniably negative impacts happening. So what happened is, I'll tell you just my own sort of clinical experience that I observed in this period, right? A number of unmarried female clients throughout lockdown. So my work really increased, I'll tell you, towards the end of lockdown, because I think people were having a difficult time coping with all of these things and really needed a safe space to talk about this, and a safe space to process their experiences and process their emotions, and also figure out how to deal with some of the conflict that was happening, right? So what I'll tell you is that a number of unmarried female clients reported an increased experiences of depression and anxiety, not just because of the fear of COVID-19. A significant number of women, as I mentioned previously, that were either college-age women or young adults, mid to late 20s working, were summoned home by families, right? As the fear of COVID-19 grew around March. Is everything okay, Kusha?
I'm just looking at the questions. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. All right. So, So a significant number of women were summoned back home. So what happened is that more often than not, these independent-minded, progressive thinking feminists now had to resume living under the same roof as their traditionally oriented and often regressive thinking parents. And that created a lot of conflict, as you can imagine. It created a lot of stress. It created a lot of communication gaps. It created a lot of misunderstandings, and it became very difficult for them. Now, for married women, I think it was a slightly different, challenging experience, right? So I'll just speak briefly about this. We talk about the fourth wave of feminism. We talk about developing strategies for equal distribution of work, but I think this pandemic tells a slightly different, or very different story about the societal expectations of women on domestic, child rearing, caregiving, interpersonal, and marital responsibilities. So I think we have come quite a ways, but what this did is it amplified the gaps that still remain, right? So many women, married women, found themselves juggling work from home responsibilities with full-time parenting, and the ever-present household tasks of cooking, cleaning, etc. Whereas many husbands reported having a nice 2-month-long vacation interspersed with the occasional domestic duty, and clearly reflecting no equal division of labor, or less than equal, I'll say, division of labor. So what happened is this led to feelings of frustration, anger, further isolation, and helplessness, especially without the availability of an outlet like meeting with colleagues, venting to friends, or even spending time with their families of origin as they might during other summer vacations, right? So they really found themselves to be a bit boxed in and challenged. Now, I think that this is also it's also seen the idea that, no matter how accomplished a woman is in her professional realm, the main priority remains her household and domestic responsibilities. And I think that is a problem that we need to address holistically, right? So what can we do about this? I think that we as feminists in this fourth wave have new forums like the internet and social media platforms in which to create sisterhood and spread awareness and find solidarity in the challenges that we face, right? And I think these platforms show that experiences are shared by others, the feelings are shared by others, they diminish the feelings of isolation and loneliness, and they can be empowering, definitely. But unfortunately, what happens is they also offer a conduit to the ever-present misogynists out there who peddle their views on the same platforms and with equal fervor. So I think one of the things that we can do is focus on self-care and balance, right? I think that is, and I know that these are sort of trending words that get thrown around a lot these days. Self-care. I know I talk about self-care a lot, either in my sessions or on my social media platform. But the fact is that we need to focus on taking care of ourselves. If we don't take care of ourselves, it's very, very difficult to take care of others or other responsibilities. We have to think of ourselves as, we're always constantly monitoring our phone batteries, right? We're always like, okay, let me have a power bank, let me have a cord handy, let me have a charger handy, etc. We don't do the same for ourselves. And I think we need to do a constant battery check. We need to know how much charge do we have left. And if you get to 50%, you need a little boost. That means you focus on doing something, even if it's just for a half an hour, that feels good for you, right? And that's a very small scale thing to do. I know that, because of all these responsibilities and all these things that have to get done, we have to find that time for ourselves. The second thing is, I think sometimes we have to learn to let go. What is a task that really will be okay if you don't take care of it today? What is a task that really, if you don't do it with 100% effort, will be okay? Sometimes we have to be okay with okay. I think a lot of times there is this push for perfectionism, right? This idea that, oh my God, I have to be the perfect this or the perfect that. And it's a fruitless endeavor, because there is no perfect. There's no perfect person. There's no perfect wife or husband or child or mother or father or professional. There's no perfect therapist. We all have flaws, and we all have areas of growth, and we all make mistakes, and we can all learn to grow, learn from what's happening around us and what we're doing. So I think if we can sort of let go of this idea of striving for perfection or striving to always reach the summit of whatever it is that we're doing. Because here's the thing, there's no race, there's no contest. Oftentimes people are running an invisible race in their minds, but there's no race, there's no expectation, except sometimes, and obviously there are societal expectations, don't get me wrong, like I said, because of the patriarchal constructs, there are fits into this box, and so you're supposed to do what's in this box, and that makes you the ideal so-and-so. But the fact is, we don't all fit into a box. Most of us don't fit into a box, nor should we, and that's okay. We have to, I think, try to move away, and it's very difficult. I understand this. I'm not speaking in a vacuum. I understand that family pressure, social pressure, cultural pressure, societal pressure, professional pressure, career pressure, they all exist. I know that they're all there. I understand that. But the thing is, we have to, I'm including myself, we have to make choices that are good for us, not always choices that are good for the others. And I think that is also something really, really important that we can all probably stand to work on, right? And part of that includes setting boundaries. We are in a culture where there's no boundaries, right? Everybody wants to know everybody's business. Everybody feels the right to give their opinions about somebody else's choices and lifestyle. People are very free with their judgments. People are very free to ask very invasive questions about one's health, medical, personal, private issues. There are no boundaries, and people don't respond well to boundaries, but boundaries are really important, because boundaries help us to understand how we want to be treated, and they help others to understand how we want to be treated. Boundaries are healthy, boundaries are necessary, boundaries are good for us. And I think that if we can even start small, right? So, okay, I'm working and it's 8 o'clock and I get a call from a client. I can't talk right now, but I'll call you tomorrow, right? Because this is my time. I have clients that are in urgent situations. They're in very difficult emotional states, but I can't be on call 24/7, because that's not good for me either, right? Because I have clients that are relying on me the next day to be at my optimal level of operation. I have a young child. I have to set a boundary with him too. I have to go to work. I have to do my work, working makes mama feel really good. Working makes me really happy when I come back and spend time with you. Like, there are boundaries that need to be set, right? Learning to say no is part of a boundary that we often have difficulty with. Someone asks us to do something, and somehow that word no just doesn't, oh, okay, okay, sure, or okay, Tika, I'll do it, you know? Even though what you want to say is no, somehow it doesn't come here. It starts here, but it doesn't come here. So we need to work on saying, you know, I would love to help you, but I can't right now. Or, you know, this won't work for me. Or, you know, I have something else that I'm doing, but maybe next time. There's nice ways to say no. We don't have to be disrespectful. We don't have to be rude. We don't have to be mean, but we can be firm and clear. It's really, really important, right? Now, all of these things that I talked about, self-care, balance, setting boundaries, recharging, all of these requires an advocacy of needs, right? We have to teach ourselves how to advocate for our own needs. I'm sure you know people in your personal spheres, either men or women, that are very good about dictating their needs, about articulating their needs, and without any qualms. Yep, I need this. Nope, I can't do this. Oh, I'm gonna go here. Oh, I won't be home right now, right? So we need to also work on that. It is not the end of the world if you're not able to do something for someone. It's not the end of the world if you say no. If people are accustomed to hearing yes from you, then yes, they're going to have a hard time the first few times you say no, but they'll get used to it because it's important. It's important to say no. It's important to know what your boundaries are. It's important to know what is too much for me right now. Maybe I have exceeded my emotional capacity right now. That's why. So what happens is, right, when we keep doing too much, we end up running out of steam, running out of charge, and then things like frustration come out more easily, right? So if I've had a hard day, I've had a long day, I'm very stressed out, what happens is I might take out my frustration on my child, or I might take out my frustration on someone who doesn't deserve to be on the receiving end of my frustration, but it's because I'm overwhelmed and I'm not doing what I need to do to decompress from that frustration or decompress from that stress. So we need to be really, really aware of what our emotions are and what our emotional needs are. That's a longer conversation that we can have at another time, but I just want to give a quick overview. So that's one part of what can we do about this. Now there's the second part. The second part is that, here's the thing. We can have all these lovely conceptual conversations and discussions around equal distribution of work, and they're important and necessary, but implementation and integration are putting these theoretical concepts into practice hasn't happened yet, right? And part of it is because, again, the patriarchal construct. What happens is there's an inherent power differential between men and women. Now, yes, I think a lot of men, I think, are coming around and obviously understanding why this is important and what kind of role they can play. And I think we need to see more of that. We need to have more allies in our feminist movement from men to understand that. So, because let's be very honest, until and unless the party in power of this patriarchal construct, men, decides that they no longer want to benefit from the advantages that are afforded by this patriarchal dynamic, there can't be any significant change. We as feminists can advocate and spread awareness and use all these platforms that we have to talk about all these important issues, and we can advocate for ourselves and we can keep moving in a forward direction. But I do believe there is some type of limit. Because we need the other part of this population to work with us to remove those limits, right? Because a lot of those limits are in their hands. So yes, I think that means having a seat at the table. Yes, that means having using your voice in a professional forum to talk about these things and to make sure that your accomplishments are heard, that your achievements are seen, and that your voice has a place. But we need allyship as well. We cannot do this without allyship. I think it's really, really important. Just as we can be allies to other communities, we also need allyship in this feminist movement. So yeah, so this is sort of how I saw the challenges that women face during this global pandemic, and I hope that this has been helpful to hear.
Yeah. Thank you, Amit. It was really nice, to hear from your experiences as a practitioner, as well as to hear about the ideas that you have presented us with. The idea of self-care, saying no, maintaining a balance. I also somehow think that though inequalities have been there, and that's what women's movements and gender movements have been fighting about. But this pandemic has actually highlighted, structural inequalities across sections and spheres, and because the resources have been limited, because the resources have been strained, and the institutional capacity has been limited. So women, it is visible, or it is coming up, that how women have been, they've been disproportionately impacted. So while we are talking about, or the world is talking about, dealing with the pandemic and recovering from the pandemic, I think we also must talk about building a more resilient world. A world that is okay with accommodating different points of view, alternative points of view. We have fought with the second and the third wave feminism. We have fought to get to address oppression, to address, of course, equal wages, though we are far from achieving that still. But yes, these we fought for all these things, but the pandemic has actually made us realize that those battles are far from being won. Women who are in the informal sector, most of the women actually, they work in the informal sector. Maybe even, I think it was 94% of the working women in Asia, if I remember it correctly, the percentage are actually engaged in the informal sector. And during this pandemic, of course, it has impacted everyone, but this percentage of women who are out of work, and then they face domestic violence, and of course all the issues that you have pointed out, in different proportions, they have been faced by all women across all sections, be it rural women, poor women, migrant women, or urban women, middle class women, working women, women who may be the CEO of a company, and they must have seen a different side of their family life and relationships during this pandemic. So of course, across all sections, they have been impacted disproportionately, but significantly. And thanks so much for talking about this. And it has actually, the pandemic has actually made us realize again that yes, we still need to work upon making this world more resilient and more accommodating and more equal. Equal as in to accommodate different identities, different individualities. So thank
And I
you.
think,
Yes.
I'm sorry, can I just make one point? So I wanted to piggyback on what you said about people working in the informal spaces. And I think what happened was also, we can't discount the emotional toll that, for women that were working, daily wage jobs, or that were working, that are middle-class women, or women of various socioeconomic strata that were able to go out and find work and get work, achieve some degree of confidence through financial independence, feeling some sense of empowerment in their ability to go out and work and earn wages and meet people, and really create a different aspect to their identities, right? That was also taken away, because so many of the women that lost their jobs due to this pandemic haven't been able to go out and work again, right? They've lost that part, that aspect of their identities. Those of us that are privileged enough to be able to continue our work, it's different for us. It's a very privileged state. But for those that don't have the same privilege, that don't have the same access or opportunity to now go out again, right? It also takes an emotional toll. It takes a toll on confidence. It takes a toll on self-esteem. It takes a toll on self-worth. It takes a toll on, it's very disheartening, I think. It's very disheartening. It feels very like, oh, well, there goes that, Who knows if I'll get a chance to do that again? And I think we have to be aware of that as well.
True, true, true. And that entire thing about micromanagement and macro management, it's heartening that it still exists. But as I think we were
Yes.
discussing the other day, we really have to catch them young, you know. We
Yes.
really must
Yes.
work.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
we must work towards, including these learnings at the school level. I think that is where it all starts, you know, the
Yes.
family, the school. So there is no difference, you know, both the jobs are equally difficult and require equal amount of hard work. And
equally important. Equally important.
Yes, who decides that who is doing the macro management and who's doing the micromanagement? I think these categories are not, you know, strictly divided categories. They are all
Absolutely
merged,
not.
specifically for the working women these days. You know, they are doing everything. They are doing the macro management and micromanagement both.
Well, and I
So-
think there's a lot of, it's not as black and white as people would like for it to be.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
it's not as absolute. I think there is a spectrum, and what we are finding is that women are doing the micro and the macro, right? They're doing the nitty gritty. I have to get, you know, the groceries and the essentials and this, but I also have to plan ahead 3 months on what is happening with my son's school and what do I have to do for work, and I have to think about Diwali cleaning, and so and so is going to be going, and I have to plan for that. Like, that's macro management. That's big picture work, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
it's not just that they're both hard, they're both difficult and hard and take a lot of effort, but they're equally as important, because both of them equally contribute to people in that household living their lives successfully. And I think that's really important. And I want to add the point what you said about starting young. Yes, I think that yes, the schools I think nowadays are teaching more like EQ related topics and discussing EQ related topics with children from a young age. But I do think that ultimately it starts at home, right? The children are looking at the dynamics that are in their homes and learning from that. They are learning about what is valuable, what is important, what is significant in their own homes based on the behavior and the discussions, right? So we can all talk the talk, but if we're not walking the walk, then it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. So we can tell our children from the time that my son was young, he knows I go to work, right? I go to work and I come home, and that's that. And he knows it. He doesn't question why do you go and why doesn't he go, etc. That's just the way it is. But if I was also in an environment where my partner was saying, oh, that's not important, you know, my work is more important or whatever, then they're also learning that. They're also ingraining and internalizing those messages. So we also have to be really aware of the messages that we are either explicitly saying in the home or modeling for our children. Because if we want to change things for the next generations to come, it starts here, right? It starts here. And so having discussions with kids about this, about what's important and why is this also important and how is this important, I think that's also very valuable.
Yeah. I mean, can we take a few questions that have
Sure.
come?
Sure.
Yeah, there is this question from Dr. Meenakshi Malhotra. It says the overwhelming question in the context you have outlined is, what do women really get within the family structure? Why are women being socialized into believing that marriage is necessary?
Okay. Okay, so what do they get from the family structure? Well, I think it's, I would say validation, some type of security, whether it's financial security, emotional security, social security, and a sense of belonging. Again, because of the second question, which is why are they measured by milestones of marriage and motherhood? Because the societal construct has been built on that, right? If you look at, I have many friends who are single and very accomplished professionals, and they might be in their 30s. And the first question is still, when are you going to get married? Not, wow, how amazing what you've done with your work, how much you've accomplished, what you've done, etc., how you've traveled, what you know, what skills you have, what kind of a person you are. but you're not married yet. Right? So we are, because I think even for women, right, there is an internalized patriarchy. Like when we talk about, you know, that typical mother-in-law, daughter-in-law dynamic where there's this evil trope of a mother-in-law and she's, you know, doing all these things to daughter-in-law or saying these things, that's all internalized patriarchy, right? It's not that she believes it, but she's been taught it. She's been told this is what happens and this is what you do and this is how it's supposed to work. So I think what they get from this is there's certain levels of security that they're getting: emotional, financial, social security. They're getting a sense of belonging and they're getting validation from society. Plus also, I'm sure it's personal satisfaction in being able to create a family or engage in a family dynamic and whatnot in a marriage and things like that. That's aside, but I think these are the main things that are driving some people.
Yes, true. The next question that we have, Ami, is
Yes.
what is the role of women peace builders during COVID-19?
I'm sorry, role of women?
Peace builders.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, what is the role of women peace builders during COVID-19? Because women peace builders, you know, as the other person has written, women peace builders are also informing local and national governments and the international community about the needs of people on the ground, especially those who are most vulnerable, such as refugees and displaced persons.
Right.
So basically, you know, women who are maybe, you know, it's talking about women who are the frontline workers during COVID-19.
Yeah. So for grassroots advocacy and empowerment, I don't know, honestly, I can't speak to that, so I don't want to give a false answer, but I imagine that it's been a very challenging time for peace builders because of lack of access and opportunity, right? And I think that we know that in refugee camps and displaced and for displaced populations, it was just as hard hit by COVID-19, right? And so I think that when you have a marginalized population, it becomes harder to access resources. It becomes challenging to sort of get your needs met as it is. And so I imagine that the role of I don't know what the role is, but I think that the role must be very difficult. And now maybe as things sort of get back to the new normal, perhaps there can be a growing role for that.
Yes, because I think UN Women, they are also conducting a research about, or they have conducted research about, I think in several countries, including Australia also, women frontline workers, you know, they're the hardest hit during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
And because, you know, I mean, that's because you have a great number of women who are in the front line, who are the frontline workers, be it as doctors or
Right.
other health professionals. So basically, you know, there is research going on about how you know, there is need to fund. There is need to provide them funding or provide other amenities. So there's all kinds of research that is going on that is being conducted by UN Women in different countries. How women are contributing more towards fighting this,
Absolutely.
both at the domestic level, social level, and
Yeah.
in the healthcare sector, of course.
Yeah.
So, are there any more questions from anyone who would like to ask a question, maybe, or maybe you can write the question? Yes. If if there are no questions at the moment, I mean, I would just like to point out again, you know, that you know, because the fourth wave of feminism actually talks about strategies, it talks about strategic actions, it talks about bringing changes in the policies, or maybe addressing you know, addressing the policy frameworks and changing them, and strategically addressing issues of like glass ceiling in the corporate sector. But still, in a country like India, you know, there are still issues related to oppression in the social sphere, in the domestic sphere, you know, that cultural oppressions or cultural oppressive ideas that still need to be addressed. So how far, you know, do you think these these ideas of Western feminism that fit in the Indian context, that also needs to be evaluated.
Absolutely. I think they can be aspirational. I mean, they can be inspirational, but it's hard to make them aspirational, I think, because we are dealing with a completely different set of constructs, right? And those constructs oftentimes provide barriers rather than steps up to move into more of like equal situation. So I think that it's we can look at Western feminism. We also have to look at feminism through intersectionality, I think, right? Because we cannot just look at feminism in a vacuum. We have to look at things like classism, casteism, LGBTQIA communities. We have to look at all sorts of different things. And I think that there are, just in terms of policies and laws that restrict movement forward in some ways. And then there's like social discrimination, institutional discrimination. There's all these things that are that are limiting us to really sort of move up the ladder of feminism in the way. So obviously I think our pace is far more different, but because our playing field is different, right? This is not a level playing field. So I don't think we can compare ourselves to sort of Western feminism. I think we need to look at ours sort of specifically within our sphere and address the issues that are specific to our needs and the needs of women in our country before we can sort of jump to that. Because even before you look at things like glass ceilings, yes, there are women that are shattering the glass ceiling, but they have opportunity, right? There are so many women that don't have the opportunity. This is not a level playing field. So I think we need to look at those things and really address those. And those are more grassroots level things, right? Those are sort of begin at home, in the community, in the society, before we sort of move forward. So I think we need to evaluate that before we look elsewhere.
That's very true. Intersectionalities, and is something that we really we must. I mean, that is where the academia is actually focusing on in terms of discourses around gender issues and women's issues. There is one more question. How does narrativizing trauma help? Is it hyperventilating or also a strategy for devising alternative frameworks for action?
I don't quite understand what narrativizing trauma means. Do they mean like talking about trauma? Do they mean?
I somehow feel maybe it's talking about the discourse, the discourse of trauma. I think that's
okay. So
what he or she is talking about.
Right. So then I think that, So I think that I do think that it's helpful to organize to create alternative frameworks, because we can't ignore trauma, right? We do have to see people's experiences through the lens of trauma, because so many people's experiences are informed by trauma. So we can't ignore the role that trauma plays. We do have to sort of incorporate that when we're talking about strategies for moving forward, or we have to talk about that when we have to incorporate that, when we're talking about finding solutions or creating movements in different aspects of our lives. Because trauma honestly is everywhere. There's generational trauma, there's interpersonal trauma, there's body trauma, there's family trauma, there's emotional trauma, there's trauma on so many levels. And I think there's a collective trauma, right? There's a collective trauma because this is a relatively young country. There's a collective trauma from colonialization. There's a collective trauma from religious conflict. There's a collective trauma from so many different things. And so I think when we look, and I'm talking about women experiencing trauma through these lenses, I'm not just talking about general trauma. So I think we have to evaluate all of those things and understand how those things shape, those experiences shape sort of where we are and who we are, and then how do we think forward.
Yes, you're very right. See, narrativizing trauma definitely becomes a strategy, no doubt about that. That's why we have the trauma literature, the emerging trauma literature here. And without documenting it, there would not be any truth. There would not be the entire process of reconciliation. So
Yeah.
as you talked about the trauma, we have the collective trauma. We faced colonization, the trauma of the partition. So if there is no documenting,
Absolutely.
the truth or the reconciliation would never come. So and that's an important strategy, of course. That becomes an important strategy in order to bring it to the public domain, or the intellectual domain. So or if, in fact, make it becomes a discourse because it is documented. It becomes a discourse there.
And I think even psychologically speaking, there's so much value in bearing witness to having it documented and talked about and told, right? I think that's also very important in terms of processing trauma.
Yes. So more than narrativizing it, it becomes important to historicize it, to place it in a context.
Absolutely.
So that's the important part. Let me see if there are more questions.
Sure.
There are a lot of comments about the talk, how informative it has been, how nice it has been. Yes. So I think we can wind up, Ami, because it was really, I think we have touched upon almost all aspects that women in contemporary times face, or you've also historicized it very well. You've contextualized it very well. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for talking about these issues, about self-care, about balancing, about saying no, about about talking about work or equal responsibilities, talking about domestic dynamics. All these things that they are not just what exactly we wanted in this webinar was not to theorize anything, but to actually talk about the everyday experiences of women across sections, women across spheres. Though this is not a very, it's a very small platform to talk about what women across sections have gone through, are going through the last 7, 8, 9 months, of course, and for decades and years. But still, we have given some pointers, we have initiated a discussion, and it's for all of us to take it further. Thank you so much for coming over, and it was really nice talking to you again. It is nice hearing you again. And I must thank all our participants for their patient hearing. I must also thank all students and faculty members who have joined us, and our principal sir, who I think is not here right now, but he has been very, very helpful, and he's been very, very encouraging towards these issues, towards women. He feels very strongly about women's issues and gender issues. I can actually say that in the true sense, he himself is a feminist. So that's really nice to have all of you. I would really request all the participants to switch on their videos so that we can have a group photo before logging off. Please switch on your videos. Yes, thank you. Please smile. Yeah, once more. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ami. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kusha, for having me, and to Shamlal College. I really appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
Yeah,
bye,
you too.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.